GM, even it's after lunch. So thanks for coming. My name is Andrzej. I work at Golem Foundation, and today I wanted to share our experience of building a protocol which is supposed to, among other objectives, fund Web3 public goods. This is a second presentation following Artem keynote this morning, but I'm sure there will be some new stuff here. So even if you have seen the presentation this morning, there will be some good stuff. So what can you expect today? I am an economist, so I'll start with some econ talk related to what public goods are and some mechanism design and incentives involved in this initiative of funding public goods. Then I will try to move to this more specific application of public good funding, which is the Web3 space. It's kind of similar, but there are some specific aspects to that. And also, we have some very cool data from the first year of Octant operations, so you will also see a lot of charts. It's like why I made yet another chart as an agenda. I thought I would get away with yet another one. Okay, so let's start with some boring definitions, but nevertheless, I think they are kind of useful in this context. So in the legacy world, we define public goods as something that is non-exploitable. Basically, it means that you cannot keep anyone from consuming the particular good as something non-rivalrous. So basically, your consumption of a public good doesn't really have a negative impact on anyone's consumption. There can be some positive externalities involved. You can see that these pictograms they show some examples of what public goods are, and probably with every example you can see that this definition doesn't really hold up in all of the cases. But that's the problem with economic definitions. Nevertheless, public goods have some interesting properties from the perspective of how they are supplied. So first, very often they are underfunded. They are undersupplied, and there are some issues with sustainability. And this is especially the case if there is no nation state that can levy taxes and basically fund such public goods. Of course, in many cases, such as some basic infrastructure or clean environment or a judiciary system, which are textbook examples of public goods to some extent. We have a nation state, but in many cases, such as digital public goods, think about Wikipedia or Internet Archive, it heavily relies on users' donations, which is not a sustainable model of fund. Now, if we move to the crypto space or Web3, you can see that most of these definition and features more or less hold up. The main difference with the legacy world or digital public goods in a broader context is that resources to potentially fund public goods are not scarce in Web3. I mean, there is a lot of potential streams of funding that could be directed to fund public goods. The problem is that we lack good coordination mechanisms to accumulate and to coordinate various actors to fund certain public goods. Of course, there are some ways to go around that. For instance, by using VC funds or issuing token, but they but by doing that, we kind of end up with public goods becoming semi-private. And this probably shouldn't be the case. And again, in Web3, there is no nation state, which is a good thing in general, and there are no taxes, which is also a good thing. But we still end up in this problem that many elements of this connective tissue of Web3, either core Ethereum protocol or many open source libraries that everyone relies on, are underfunded because the potential benefits of working on such public goods are not evenly distributed. Various actors have various motivations to fund such initiatives. So the most heavily used tool to fund public goods in Web3 right now is our various funding rounds, funding programs. Has any of you participated in a Gitcoin round? Okay. Do we have any recipients of or projects who received, representatives of projects who received funding from Gitcoin or RetroPDF or? Okay, so there is some. So if we look at all of these funding mechanisms in Web3, we can see that there are like 4 basic components that you need for such a program to run. So first, of course, you need funding. So you need like a source of capital to finance certain public goods. You need to set some objectives, which are what the money should be spent on. You need donors, and by donors, I mean individual donors. To some extent, we need donors to accumulate more capital, but also donors are quite important to signal what should get funded. So individual donations, even if there is a very generous matching funding, then still donors are kind of important to signal and to provide information about what sort of public goods should get funded. And of course, you need a distribution mechanism. So here I want to introduce you Octant, so which is like a flagship project by Golem Foundation. In terms of capital, Golem Foundation stakes 100,000, actually a bit more than that. And this staking operation generates sustainable yield, and this yield is directed to Octant, among other things, to fund the matching funding for public goods and to distribute rewards to users who participate in Octant. The objectives are basically to express the preferences in terms of public goods funding of the community of GLM token holders. GLM is an ERC20 token. It was created in 2016 in Golem Network crowdfunding, and Golem Foundation is a spin-off from Golem Network, with the objective of finding new use cases for the GLM. The donors, in our case, these are GLM lockers. So users have to lock the GLM token, and after some time, they are eligible to receive rewards for participating in governance, and they can either actually decide whether to claim the rewards or to donate their rewards to public good projects. And also we need a distribution mechanism. In our case, it was, I will say a few words about that later, but we started with a linear distribution of matching funding. Now we are using quadratic funding. Here is a very simple chart that shows the flow of value in Octant. So again, we start with Golem Foundation staking ETH. This generates yield, which is then directed to Octant. Octant rewards are distributed to users who lock their GLM and receive proportionally to the amount of GLM lock they receive rewards every quarter. They can either withdraw their rewards or allocate or donate them to public good projects. If they do so, then their donation is matched with some generous matching funding from also from the staking operations of Golem Foundation. Every quarter, we have something called allocation window. It's a 2-week period during which every user is able to first is presented with a list of eligible projects. In the recent epoch, we had 30 projects that users could choose from. They basically shortlist them by clicking this little heart. It's sort of like an e-commerce basket experience. Once they do that, in another view, they can decide on what fraction of their individual rewards should be directed to one of the public good projects. Also, you can see that you can sort of predict the amount of matching funding based on the current state of things that will be directed to your project. So far, Octant has so far users of Octant have locked 156 million GLM, which is about less than 16% of the token supply. To give you some intuition, like 1 GLM is about like 1 Polish zloty, more or less. Or if you are not Polish natives, divide this by 4 and you will get like more or less the USD equivalent. We have about 1,000 lockers at the moment. The entry ticket to join Octant is 100 GLM, that's the minimum lock. So about $25. The median lock is about 1,000. So you can already see that the average, like if you divide the 156 million by 1,000, the average is like in hundreds of thousands GLM. So the distribution of our lockers is a bit skewed. We also have larger ways, which is a big challenge, and I will talk about this later. Over 1 year, our staking operations resulted in more than 3,000 ETH of staking rewards. About 600 of these were claimed by users as rewards for participating in Octant governance. More than 1,100 ETH was distributed to over 50 public good projects. So this is in today, if we take today's exchange rate, it's almost $3 million that Octant community distributed to fund various public goods. To give you just some intuition about how Octant compares with other funding mechanisms that are out there in Web3. So probably the closest initiative that we could compare Octant with is Gitcoin Grants. The Gitcoin Grants 20 had a matching funding which was like more than twice as the amount we had in Octant Epoch 4. One epoch is 3 months, so basically this is the amount we have to multiply by 4 to get like the annual. But in a way that the similar applies to Gitcoin Grants as well. If we compare Octant with Gitcoin, you can also see that Octant is a bit more boutique because we have only 30 potential grantees. We are doing this on purpose. We kind of believe that it makes sense for our users to be able to like review the entire list of potential projects. If we would go beyond 30, that would make it really hard, like for our community to assess what should get funded. Also, you can see that the donation, the size of individual donation, which again come from individual rewards that are like, generated within the system, are much smaller than in Gitcoin. But again, this is a consequence of Octant being gatekept by the requirement to lock GLM. So we cannot spontaneously allocate in an Octant allocation window. We are working on that, but we are not there. We're not there yet. So this also results in the leverage being way higher in Octant. So by the leverage, I mean the amount of matching funding that is added on top of user donation. I have also added Optimism's retro funding just as a benchmark to show that there are some really huge public funding mechanisms out there which are way larger than Octant is at the moment. So this is like my statistician's perspective here, but just to give you some intuition, even though the circumstances are very different, it turns out that the distribution of how our users allocate funding is not that much different than in Gitcoin or in RetroPGF. For instance, the top 25% in all cases account for about 40% of the matching funding distribution. Octant is a bit special because we don't have our funding cap is very high. So the most successful project in the recent Octant epoch was able to claim about 16% of the matching funding, which couldn't have happened, let's say, in Gitcoin. Okay, we can look at Octant as an experimental platform. We keep tweaking something in the algorithm every epoch. And the core of this experiment is to answer the question if like users are willing to give up a fraction of their individual rewards to fund public goods. These amounts on the left-hand side, you can see that they vary epoch by epoch. Probably epoch 3 was a bit of an outlier. I would say that this 2 to 3% generosity coefficient, if you will, is probably the equilibrium we are right now in, and most likely this is what I would expect in future epochs. And by the way, it's a good example because in developed countries between like 2 and 3%, it's exactly the amount households are willing to give up for charity. Even though we don't consider Octant to be charity, because we kind of believe that our community wants to invest in specific outcomes and funds projects that make sense to them, it's an interesting comparison. Also, it's worth emphasizing that like more than 90% of our users, by users I mean Ethereum addresses that interact with Octant, are donors. So they decide to allocate at least part of their rewards to public goods. On the other hand, you can also see that this generosity, or the fraction of individual rewards that is allocated to public goods, is way higher among smaller lockers. So by smaller lockers, I mean those who lock less than 20,000 GLM, so about $5,000. And this is also like what brings us to a mechanism design challenge that we faced a couple of months ago. So we have about 90% of our users who account only for 5% of the total donations. And in this linear model of funding, basically the 5% it also translates to their voting power. So for quite some time, we kind of believe that this is not a bug, it's a feature. But there are like two major problems. So first of all, like plutocracy is an issue. And the first one was that the results of a funding round were very sensitive to movements or decisions of a handful of whales, which if they happened, and that was the case in ETHWarsaw 3, if they happened just towards the end of the allocation window, it just turned the table and of the leaderboard, and many other users were not even able to respond to certain decisions by the whales. And also, as I mentioned, like a good funding program, in my opinion at least, it really requires individual donations, and especially like smaller ones, because this is how you gather useful information and signals from your community. And the problem with that was that our users, like having seen what little impact they have with smaller donations, they ended up growing disincentivized to participate in funding rounds. So that's why we decided to introduce quadratic funding in Epoch 4. I assume like some of you might have heard about it, but just like a very short introduction. So in this linear distribution that we used initially, basically the share of matching funding that the project receives just depends on the total amount of funding, of individual donations. So let's say we have two projects, each of them manages to raise 300 WEI or ETH, doesn't really matter. The only difference is that project A has 3 individual donors and project B has 1 big individual donor. In this case, so this is how Octant worked until Epoch 3. Each of these projects would get the same share of the matching fund, because the only thing that mattered was the total amount received. In quadratic funding, so this new mechanism that we introduced, the total the share of matching funding a project receives is basically based on the squared sum of square roots of individual donations. And if we replicate the same numerical example, so again, 2 projects, one of them with 1 donor and 2 of them, and the second one with 3 donors with the same total amount, you can see that the one with more donors basically has a much higher share of the matching. So this is how we envision this, and we, again, as an experiment, we implemented this logic in Epoch 4, and yeah, the nice thing is that it worked pretty well. So these are like real numerical, it's like real data from the voting in Epoch 4. In the second column, you can see that the big lockers, so those with more than 20,000 GLM lock, their share in total donations was more than 90%, and this would exactly have been their voting power if we use the linear distribution. What changed was that with quadratic funding, their voting share is now slightly above 50, and the group which would have only enjoyed about 8% of the voting power now has almost half. You can see this working in practice on this more granular breakdown of specific groups. Okay, I know that like putting entire spreadsheets in a slide should be considered a felony, but I will only do this once. So here you can see the list of projects which received funding in Octant Epoch 4. And in the last column, that's the very interesting one, you can see what is the net effect of introducing quadratic funding. So if there is like a green, and these amounts are in E, by the way. The green and the darker, the greener the field, the more the project benefited from introducing quadratic funding. You can sort of see that this especially applies to those who are the winners in this change. Applies to those projects who manage to accumulate both a big amount of individual donors, but also the big total amount of donations. So these things correlate very well with the matching funding received. If we apply the linear model, this would be a straight line only in the right-hand side chart. So it would be just a 100% correlation with the total amount of donations. I think I'll skip this one. So we have at least time for a couple of questions. But let me wrap this up with by returning to this like building blocks of public good funding program. So I have sort of hinted that some elements of that are not entirely sustainable, and by working on the next version or the evolution of Octant, we are considering creating something called sustainable public goods funding as a standard, an industry standard that could be adopted not only by us, but also by other communities. So in terms of funding, it would sort of make sense to move away from static capital being used on discretionary basis to sustainable funding streams, such as, in our case, yield from staking operations. But you can also think about, let's say, L2 sequencer fees or many other streams that can be directed to public goods funding. As for objectives, this means moving to not only objectives of a single community, but coordinating objectives across many communities, thinking more about the outcomes and measuring impact. As for individual donors, it would make a lot of sense for participants to become financially empowered, kind of the way we have been doing this at Octant, and moving away from being just like charity donors. And as for the distribution mechanisms, well, it again would make a lot of sense for this to become a multi-level thing where many communities apply their own distribution mechanisms which are applicable to their particular situation. So that's it from me. Thank you. Make sure to visit our socials. We have a booth downstairs, so go down the hallway. And at 10:30 tomorrow, there will be a presentation by Artem, our head of engineering, and he will present you with a more detailed vision of how we see this unfolding. I think we have space for like a couple of questions. So, yep.
I'm going to come over with the mic, so the question is recorded for the stream as well.
Hello? Okay. Are you concerned about Sybil attacks?
Yes, well, we are, and it's a huge topic. I didn't touch this on purpose because this would result in a. So right now we are using Bitcoin Passport or Passport as a Sybil shield. It's not a perfect solution, and there are like really many challenges with that. It's an ongoing discussion, and our internal calls are usually captured in more than half of the time is about Sybil resistance. So yeah, we are thinking about that. Happy to discuss this later.
Thank you.
Can you share a little bit more details about the multi-level governance that it was on the last slide?
Okay, so sure. So we don't yet have it. We are still working on this new standard, and we don't yet have a full architecture of how this is going to look like. But long story short, it would make sense for various communities, such as communities of various L2s or many other like DAOs with non-negligible treasuries, to be able to come together and decide on what fraction of their either income or even the treasury itself can be directed to public goods funding, and also to enable them to make their own decisions, which are kind of specific to a particular either DAO or an L2 or any other community. So we'll be working on that. It's a huge challenge because everyone is sort of incentivized to do their own thing, but we can also think about certain mechanisms to make them occur, and we'll see how this unfolds.
Okay, thank you, Andrzej. Yeah.
Thank you.